Hi everybody, thank you very much for joining. Tonight is the second meeting of the Property Meetup. We are in the virtual realm on Zoom rather than this being based in Southampton as it would be ordinarily. We're all around the country and even international again. Thank you to Chris in Madrid who spoke to us last time. I'm sure you'll all remember his impassioned plea to everybody to stay at home. I am just going to stop the waiting room because we've started. Thank you very much for coming. The success of the first meeting made me think we should do this on a regular basis. So I've decided to start with those people who we had on the panel from last time and give them more of an opportunity to deep dive into who they are, where they're from, what they're doing. So I've dubbed it a fireside chat. Obviously we're in spring and we are eco-friendly, so there are no fires burning here. We're not producing any more CO2 than we produce naturally. So we are going to go with a series of one-on-one but group discussions where we can delve a bit deeper, free-ranging, no particular agenda. I have a number of headlines just to make sure we cover off the bases. The idea is to hear from the person in the hot seat, and I'm very, very excited to say tonight's hot seat is with Rich Liddle. Now, just before I let Rich have the opportunity to introduce himself, and I will give him the floor and throw the odd prompt in from now and then. Seeing as we have such a large group, I just wanted to make sure that everybody understands a few things that can help them in their property investing or their business journey whilst they're on. I was talking to one of my mortgage brokers today who was very diligently following the government guidelines about what to do, not in terms of self-isolating, he was following those for sure, but in terms of the help that he could get. And that wasn't necessarily the best approach in particular relation to the grant. And I just thought, yeah, whilst we've got so many people on, let's just make sure we cover off the headlines. So I'm not going to go through these in any detail, but I just want to give you the opportunity to have a prompt so that you can go and investigate them in more detail. There's loads of free resources online, on Facebook, on the web, and we may even get into some of them later depending on what Rich wants to cover. So if you're an employee, there is a scheme where you may be temporarily no longer required by your employer, and so you're sort of put on the shelf, which is referred to as being furloughed, and the government gives 80% of your salary. It's up to employer whether or not that is topped up to 100%. I know a number of people on the call today are in that situation with, I think, a sense of mixed feelings in many respects about that, but some welcome relief that there is some help. That scheme has been extended. If you're self-employed, so if you're self-employed sole trader and you have some accounts from a number of years, they will look at that in a similar vein. You don't have to stop working if you're self-employed, which is interesting, but you do get up to 80% based on some accounts. I know they want 3 years. I think they're prepared to consider less, so well worth asking. If you're a tenant, or for us, if we're landlords, the government is suggesting what they're calling rent holiday. I think that's a very, very poor misnomer, because what it is a potential rent deferment, i.e., if you're affected by coronavirus, you can put off a portion of that rent for up to 3 months. The equivalent, if you're an owner or for us with buy-to-let, is a mortgage holiday. Again, it's a deferment, not a holiday, so you do have to pay the money, you have to pay it back later. You have to ask your mortgage provider, and you can get up to 3 months for some or all of it. They can refuse, but I think they are unlikely to refuse. If you're a residential mortgage holder or you're a buy-to-let mortgage holder, you are very much in the sights for that scheme. I am in that discussion with some of my commercial and development lenders. One of the commercial ones is seemingly quite favourable, less so on the development side, but it's always worth thinking about what you want and what you need to do. If you're a limited company and you occupy some premises and you pay little or no business rates, the government wants to give you free money. Free money is always interesting, in the form of a grant for £10,000. You do have to occupy premises, so you can't just have gone online, paid 13 quid and have a virtual company. You'd have to be sort of trading business or some version of that. If you are bigger than that or you don't fall into that criteria, the government announced things called CBIL loan schemes, which they're administering through banks, through the lending environment. Basically, they are backstopping a bunch of that lending, and they're providing an interest-free period to you as the person borrowing the money. That's a loan from a bank, but if the loan amount is under £250,000, you are not supposed to be asked for a personal guarantee for the 20% that the government's not backing of that loan. The government recently, Rishi Sunak recently clarified that situation. So there's a number of schemes available. I am not an expert in any of these things, but I want to make, and there are many people, including probably someone on this call. I certainly know, I suspect Dan Fitzhenry is on this call. There are lots of resources you can look at, lots of people to talk to who know more about these things than me. But I just wanted to make sure we all know they're available, following the chat I had with someone today. Turning to property investing and property education. If you're an attendee to one of my previous meetings, you know I love a podcast recommendation. So I'm going to throw out three, maybe four podcasts. IPI, Inside Property Investing, Mike Stenhouse's podcast, truly phenomenal. The other podcast recommendation is the Property Podcast, which is the two Robs, lots of very good Robs in property. Particularly if you're new, I would recommend the Property Podcast, and I would go back and start with episode 1 from that. My favorite property podcast is an American one called Bigger Pockets. That's less relevant for day-to-day kind of tactics in the UK, but is awesome for inspiration and broader ideas and thinking outside the box and ways to apply creative buying techniques and creative ideas. Obviously, you need to translate that over here. Loads and loads of meeting opportunities, including ours here. Lots of them over Zoom, and we'll be bringing you this meeting maybe every week if I can manage it, but certainly every fortnightly or monthly. And we maybe even will turn that into a podcast series. We're going to be recording these video conversations and making them available to everybody as well, and putting on YouTube. The format for today, we're going to have a chat with Rich. Rich and I will have a chat. If you have any questions, unmute yourselves, throw the questions out, or if you can't get a word in edgeways, because we quite like the sound of our own voices, put it on the written chat, which I will be monitoring as we go. And we'll just chat for 30-40 minutes. I will open it up for questions at the end, but please, by all means, jump in as we go. I will cap things at the hour. We went for 2 hours last time, and a phenomenal number of people who stayed on the line for ages. We've got 40 people tonight, which is fantastic. I was hoping we might nudge the 50 mark today. Almost there. David has just asked a question. What about directors who take dividends rather than salary? His understanding is there's no support in that case. Okay, so my understanding is, just from my own research, I'll have a first go at an answer. The portion that you take as salary, so many people do somewhere around £700 a month or just under £1,000 a month, depending on what threshold you want to look at. The portion you take at salary, you could do something on in terms of the equivalent employed relief, but you need to be very careful. If you're the managing director of your own company, you can't furlough yourself, because essentially you're going to shut the company down. But if you have partners, spouses, other sort of part-time employees, you potentially could do something. As far as I am aware, I don't yet know of any assistance on the sort of larger portion of your income that you might be taking as a director. So if you're one step up from being a sole trader, as many of us have moved into sort of running things through limited companies or owning companies, but you're not a larger company, then you want to look at the grant if you occupy premises, and there are some very favourable loan schemes. Obviously, they at little or no interest cost and very little risk. Those ones are a loan, a thing you can do. I don't know of anything else in terms of directly helping people who want who take most of their income from being a director. Not my area of expertise, so we'll move on. Rich, I know you are already reasonably famous in the property world and growing. I would very much like to get to the point where we talk about what you are doing today and your thoughts on the current market, the current environment. For those of us like myself who have only come to you reasonably recently, though, I'm always interested in a backstory. And so I would love to start with a little bit of your background, what you did before property, and what initially got you interested in investing in property.
Yeah, absolutely, and happy to do that. And so, Rob, thanks very much for having me. And it's great to see so many faces. What I will do, say quickly while we're talking about the grants, before I do go on to the backstory, those of you, as I say, I'm far from an expert in this era as well. However, I have a property in my portfolio, which is an HMO, which is rented as holiday let, so short-term accommodation. I applied for the £10,000 grant on Friday, and I received it today. Okay, so they are very your councils for that. A lot of people. I spoke to one of the people who works with us as part of what's called our expedition program, and she understood it that if your company was not registered as a holiday let or short-term lettings company, then you were ineligible. But that's not the case, because the business rates are payable on the property, and obviously when business rates are payable, they have the business rate, or the VOA will give it an allocation of why you're paying business rates, i.e. short-term accommodation, holiday lets, etc. It's not the company that's looked at, it's the physical property. The council websites where you are, certainly where I am in North Yorkshire, are very, very good, and they've really quite switched on with a good application of we filled in, verified, as I say, today, and the money was paid today. So do look into those grants if you have short-term accommodations, something along those lines that can be used for those grants.
Rich, am I right in saying if you have a short-term holiday let business or an SA business of any sort, there is in the hospitality sector, there's an additional £25,000 grant that you could
apply. So it's if the rateable value is under 15,000, so in other words, you get 100% rate relief, it's £10,000.
Okay.
15,000 rateable value, and I believe it's 52,000 rateable value, then the grant is 25,000. If it's above that, then you receive nothing. One of the ones that was quite interesting today is the lady in question who asked me. She's bought a social club that she's to convert into 4 flats. Now that conversion hasn't yet started, but she has received a business rates bill for that building, and it is still obviously allocated as a social club. She's putting an application for that today. You may as well use it, because ultimately she's saying, I feel bad by doing it, but at the end of the day, what this saga has caused is is probably a 3-month delay in the build. So it is going to cost her in that long run. So I said, put it in. The money has been allocated. You may as well have it, quite frankly. And that's my view on a lot of things. So yeah, looking, as I say, that was one that she's bought as a social club, or to convert into a social club, but she hasn't yet started the work, so it's going to allocate as social club on the business rates.
Thank you, Rich.
So, Rob, backstory. So where did I come from? So basically, I have been in the military for the past 21 years. So I'm a pilot in the Air Force. Have been since 1998. I joined the Royal Navy as a helicopter pilot in 98. and then flew what are called Commando Sea King helicopters throughout from 2003, the first invasion of Iraq, all the way through. So Iraq, Afghanistan. I've done every conflict the UK has been involved in since the First World War, 91. So I've done from Northern Ireland, former Yugoslavia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, over the main ones. Two very large counter-terrorism operations in Africa. So as you can see, from my military career, I've been dotted around the world. I transferred from the Navy to the Air Force in 2009 to fly fighter jets for them. So again, staying with the pilot, which from helicopters to jets. So my life and my career has very much been military based. I formally retired on the 15th of March last month. That was my formal retirement date.
Congratulations.
Pensioner for the past 2.5 weeks. And I'll get that pension, which is weird to say when I'm 43, that I'll get a pension for the rest of my life, but that's where I can't complain. So where did property fall into that? Well, let's roll back to 2003. I lived in a small village called Ilchester, which is just outside of Yeovilton in Somerset, which was the Naval Air Station there. And I had a little 2-bedroom cottage, and I was deployed to Iraq. We set sail on HMS Ocean to go to war, in essence. Well, that was where we were going, and nobody knew how long we would be gone for. So I rented out that rented out that little 2-bedroom cottage, and that was it. The classic accidental landlord started.
Lovely. Yeah.
So I came back to the UK 8 months later. There was a young family in that cottage, and I was then posted away from Yeovilton, and I simply kept that property. And that really was my first introduction to property investing. Quite weird. The military give you a grant as well, an advance of pay to put deposit down on your first house of up to 25%, which is it's free money, no interest payable whatsoever. And I paid 106,000 for that little cottage, and the military gave me £25,000. Now, one of the stipulations is that you're not allowed to rent property. So at the time, again, back in 2003, I rented it. Off I sailed on HMS Ocean round to Iraq. And I tell you what, there's not very many things I'd say the military are efficient at, but Christ, they found out that I'd rented that thing. And the very next month, I got you must pay 25,000 back within 28 days, or else you will be getting paid off us for the next X number of months. And they can do that in that draconian manner because ultimately they were paying us. They were my employer. The rules said that I couldn't. But anyway, so that was the start of it. I bopped around the world for a wee bit on military deployments for the next few years until I ended up flying the search and rescue helicopter out of Prestwick in Scotland on the west coast. And it was that point I thought that little cottage was doing me quite well. It was giving me an extra 300 quid a month on a little buy-to-let. And I thought, you know what, why not try and look into this a little bit more? Used to spend a lot of time in Glasgow when I was in air, and used to socialise in the west end of Glasgow. For those of you who know, Glasgow is a nice part of the world. And I started to do, back then, which was simple multi-let. HMOs, but not as an HMO that you would imagine it now. It was simply, we buy a 3-bedroom flat, we put 5 students in it, and there were tenement flats in Glasgow, and you'd all of a sudden have a flat as a 5-bed HMO. And I cycled through, ended up with 14 of these. 14 of them, the smallest was a 4 up to a 7. And it was brilliant. Very good cash flow. It wasn't like it is now. It was not that HMO, I'm not going to say HMOs are easy now, but they're very, to be honest, as long as you understand it, they are relatively straightforward. The rules, the regulations, the licensing, etc. But back then, it was just a case of buy a flat, whack in 5 students, collect your rent, and that's all you did.
Brilliant.
And it was a great time. It was a great time to be property investing up there, and it was a great market. Now that was up in Glasgow, and I did a few in Edinburgh as well, because my partner at the time, who I was then married to, she lived in Edinburgh, so we did a few in Edinburgh as well. So I was kind of dominating that Scottish belt, shall we say, from Glasgow across to Ayr. And I also had a few apartments in Ayr itself. Now, I'm going to try and keep this brief, but those of you, when we get to what I'm doing now, is I love a lease, okay? If I can put a lease on an HMO or a block of flats or something like that, an FRI lease, give it away to a supported living organisation, a charity, or anybody like that, I love it. That's very much what I do. I love handing that entire property on an FRI lease and then stepping back from it. I'm not into the management or the day-to-day running. And I could talk about that in a little bit as well, about identifying your passion. And I very much I identified that wasn't my day-to-day passion. But what I'm getting at here is I identified that the military, if there's military people on here, they'll have probably heard of a term called SSSA. The military, whenever there might be a military base somewhere, but there might be a shortage of married quarters or single living accommodation in that area. And when that happens, the military, the Ministry of Defence, will house those individuals, married quarters or individuals, in single living accommodation, privately rented flats, privately rented houses, whatever that may be. Now, when I was flying the search and rescue at Preston Airport, they'd closed down what was HMS Gannet, the military camp there. And what that left was about 150 servicemen who the Ministry of Defence were going to have to rent accommodation for. And I immediately saw, it was like, ping, I see my route to easy rentals. So I basically started buying small 2-bed flats in air and then doing what's called SSSA in the military. For a small 2-bed flat up there, you would have probably got about 495 rental, but the Ministry of Defence would have paid you 695. So again, it was immediate it was identifying a problem and seeing how I can do that.
And so that's hands off then.
100%.
The military took over it, they ran everything.
Completely hands off, and that's what I love. And that still happens now. SSSA is a fantastic thing. If anybody wants, it was all bought out by a private company called Annington Homes, bought it all. Annington Homes now run it all, but they still do the private rented sector under what's called SSSA.
And do you still do that with some of your new ones these days?
To be honest, I don't. And the only reason I don't is because that entire Scottish portfolio didn't survive a divorce. So that all went by the wayside and was kind of sold off and split up on the back of that divorce, which wasn't a bad thing, quite frankly, because that was done in 2000, the early part of 2007. So actually, it may well have been.
Really? Okay.
The only reason I don't now is because where I am and where my portfolios are, where I've been since with the military, there's always been military accommodation. So hence the demand for SSSA is not there. But friends of mine do that as a strategy. They will physically find the military establishments which haven't got, and you know, I could literally list them for you right now, the ones which are booming, where if you bought something local to that and then offered it up to the scheme, which is called SSSA, it would be taken off its hands for 3 years. So that is a kind of a strategy. And what I think hopefully you might have seen there is what I identified my passion in property world wasn't necessarily the property, it wasn't doing the refurbs or anything like that. It was actually finding problems and solving problems, finding kind of complex situations and being able to capitalize on them and turn them into a means to make me money at the end of the day. So finding properties to rent to SSSA. Would I have bought half a dozen flats in air if I couldn't put them on that scheme? No, I wouldn't. So it's the case of identifying that problem. So moving from there, I did a bit of a stint in North Wales, flying jets. Then I moved down to Bryce Norton in Oxfordshire. Once I was in Oxfordshire, again, at that point, recession had ended, or recession was in the kind of downturn. That's when I really jumped on the back of creative lease options and looked at strategies and started really understanding and capitalizing on options. And that's from that. And again, that comes back down to identifying a problem, identifying somebody's pain point. How can I help you moving forward? And that's what I did. I did lease options. Again, but that was down in the southwest really now. So from Oxford all the way out to Bristol. And it was taking on anything on an option, whether it be a small house up to large portfolios, as long as the figures stacked, you know, we could make money and do it as a win between parties. Moved from there, finally up to where I am now, which is in York, and I was flying from an air station just by York here until I retired last month, sorry. And then I've been up in York since 2014. So since 2014, I've very much centred so basically everywhere I've moved, I've kind of built a portfolio, and that's what I did. So I kept it local at the time, but of course when I moved away, it then wasn't local, but I've managed, because what I talked about, leases and renting them out, which is something that I'm very massive fan on, they've become very hands-off. So I dominated my portfolio while I've been up here, very much in the North Yorkshire region, the majority of it being in Hull, Again, jumped on the back of Hull pre-2016 for a number of reasons. A lot of this comes down to your own analysis, which is another thing that I talk about a lot, is actually analysing correctly. The reason Hull, about to become the city of culture. Who had been the city of culture before that was Liverpool, so you're riding the wave of what's gone on. Different type of city to Liverpool. You're never going to get the tourism element. People aren't going to go to Hull for a holiday. But what Hull did have was it was starting to build the wind farms, and it was going to become the centre for renewable energy in Europe, which it now is. So actually what that brought is a hell of a lot of contractors, a hell of a lot of people coming in facilities. All I did is I identified that. That was clearly open source information in the council's 5-year plan. If people don't read their local council's 5-year plan, I'd encourage you to do so, because it tells you what is or what they're thinking about doing in that. And that goes from everything from railway links to large out-of-town shopping centres to large developments, whatever that may be. It gives you an indication of, is this region going to boom, or boom it in inverted commas with potential new workforce in the next 5 years. And that really brings me to where I am now. So I'm still investing in the North Yorkshire region, stretching my arms a little bit these days up towards Sunderland and Newcastle, just because my new business partner as part of Blue Oak is from that neck of the woods. And kind of my new venture since I've left is Blue Oak. And Blue Oak is hopefully something completely different, should we say, on social media. And so I'll give you a quick rundown of Blue Oak. I don't want to go off, probably my backstory's gobbed on for quite a lot here, but I'll give you a quick little rundown of Blue Oak. So we said where that came from, and the history, quite frankly, is last year I met Paul Smith, not of Touchstone Paul Smith, but just shares the name Paul Smith. Young lad from the Northeast, getting involved in property investing, spent a lot of money educating himself in property. However, was always missing a piece, okay, with that property education. Bought a property in Sunderland on the back of that, and basically we met on a train. We were on a train heading back up north, and we just got chatting. And in that conversation, I realised that this property that he had bought and was starting the work on with joint venture money was actually, excuse my French, a shit show. Okay, so, and he hadn't been helped along the way by his so-called, in inverted commas, mentors. He'd been allowed to get himself in this situation. Now, spent a bit of time with Paul. We got over the initial emergency bits and bobs, i.e. 5-bed HMO, Article 4 area, not permission to do so, development had already started, all sorts of little basic points that had been missed and never once picked up by said educators. We got on very well, and to be honest, I identified that there's a massive gap in this market, and it's not a gap in the market to capitalize on and sell courses. It's a gap in the market to do things right and help people where they genuinely need help. And we decided to set up a community. Blue Oak started on Facebook, started in October last year. It's relatively young, but it grew, and it grew fast. And it grew fast because we set ourselves 3 core values of open, honest, and ethical, and we've truly stuck by them. We will share everything. There's no ulterior motive to anything, and we will genuinely help. And if we can't help, we will know somebody who can help. And that's what all we wanted to do with Blue Oak. And Blue Oak's grown and grown. We've now got, we've just set up a new site called Peak Performance to help people become better people through what are called marginal gains and becoming a better person. Because quite frankly, that's all I used to do in the military, is marginal gains. We've also got a health and fitness arm to it as well, so Blue Oak Health and Fitness. And ultimately, my vision for Blue Oak is a brand, not a property sector. We're also building our own portfolio under Blue Oak, very much into the supported living and healthcare side. But bear in mind that we only started in October last year, and we are going at 100 miles an hour. And that's pretty much been my passion since I left the military. Okay. So there's your backstory.
No, that's fascinating. It's always good. Always love the journey stories, and I think that's particularly relevant for people, who wanting to learn and apply those ideas to their own situation. So you've brought us up to date, I think, there with Blue Oak, and starting in October in recent Yeah, recently retiring from, that's really interesting, retiring. So do you say you're 41?
No, I'll be 40. I'm 43 in June.
43, so really early, gosh, and a pension and a pension for life.
Pension for life, yeah.
You've already done the passive income thing.
Yeah. And you know, one thing I didn't actually say in all of that, when most people will go career, and then at a point in that career that I want to step out and do something else, therefore they may start property. Okay, what I did is I started it very, very early on, and I just liked the game. Okay, I liked the challenge of discovering and solving problems, but I was able to run the two of them concurrently and alongside. And I would say to anybody, it is possible. When people are saying I haven't got the time, well, that's absolute bullshit. It's just you haven't prioritized things correctly. You can always do it. Why people fail to run them concurrently is because they want to go from 0 to 100 miles an hour or 100 properties overnight, because that's what they've seen on social media. Okay, what they need to do is just take it one step at a time and slowly build up a portfolio, a pot, an education slowly, okay, and run it concurrently with your other piece. There is always time. I bought a development back in 2012, I'm going to say, while I was deployed in Syria over a sat phone. Okay, so it is always possible. There is always ways to do it. I bought that development over a sat phone, of which you got 20 minutes per week to make a telephone call back to the UK while we were at conflict. Wow. And I bought this development, still own now, and we put the planning application in while I was still deployed, and then by the time that had gone through, I was actually home. But the crux of it was I'd physically bought that property, which I'd never seen before I left, while I was deployed. There's always ways and means, and in a way, that's what I want to create with Blue Oak, with that family feeling that if people need that help or people want to. The support is there, and we are, you know, it's always one of us, myself, Paul, or the other business partner, Andy. We are always at the forefront of that help.
It's great to hear success stories of buying remotely. We have actually hit 50 people on the call now, and just to temper that enthusiasm, I bought a property remotely when I spent a year working in Japan, and it was an absolute fucking disaster.
Yeah.
It's great to hear the positives, and I bought it sight unseen, and maybe buying a development sight unseen is a bit better than buying a property sight unseen, but I will never ever buy sight unseen again.
Well, do you want to hear the downside as well? I've got a bad one as well, which is bought remotely. Well, it wasn't even remotely, it was down to sheer laziness. And again, I think we may see some of that. You know, I love analysis, I love predictions, where we're going to go, but looking at the statistics behind it, I view us getting to a point with this coronavirus where we're all inside and locked away, where we've accepted the new norm, because we've got to understand that we're in a new norm now. We can't go out. I think once we start to see a light at the end of the tunnel and people start to think, and confidence will start to rise. There's a very dangerous piece. I did a little an article in our Facebook group recently that when confidence starts to rise and you're at peak boredom, people get complacent. People start making mistakes. So let's roll back a few years, okay, to 2008. I was deployed. I was bored. Property market was in ruin in the UK, and it was starting to. There was a few little shoots starting to come up, but large confidence. I thought we're at the bottom. We're picking up again now, but I was bored. Very dangerous combination. And I bought a off-plan flat in Edinburgh. Not seen. Mortgages was all sorted out, all that back-end paperwork. If people were investing back there, they'll realize that this were prolific. Overnight mortgages. So I was going to buy it at 112,500. It was valued at 139, would do a next day remortgage on that thing, and I'd get all my money back. Well, I would never put all the money in. It would simply be valued at 139. Lloyds Bank would, Lloyds Bank,
same day refinance, lovely.
Yeah, they would give me a mortgage for 112. Yeah. So I was like, brilliant, I'm buying into that, signing the dotted line, 2-bed flat in Edinburgh, can't go wrong. Now, lo and behold, I'd gone through all of this process, seen pictures of it, seen paperwork on it, and it got to the legal paperwork, and I saw a postcode good. That's it. And bear in mind, I'd never once been up there. And also bear in mind that I was home at this point, so I was back in the UK, but I was like, oh, sorry, I bought it. Don't need to go up there. Massive, massive mistake. And I signed a bit of paperwork, and the postcode was KY12. And I thought, that's not an Edinburgh postcode. Where is that? Lo and behold, went on, couldn't do it on your phone at that point, but went on on a computer and found out that KY12 is actually in Dunfermline, which is the other side of the river in Edinburgh. But because it's geographically within 100 miles of the centre of Edinburgh, they were legally allowed to prefix it as Edinburgh. Like your London Gatwicks, your London Stansted, if it's within 100 miles of the centre, you can prefix it with that name. And I just thought, oh, sod it, I'm that far along the line. And I bought the flat. It was valued at 139. I got a mortgage by Lloyds, which is now TSB, for 112. And don't get me wrong, there wasn't a penny left in that deal, but the thing's probably not even worth £139,000 now.
Wow.
Okay, so massive, massive wake-up call for me there. Massive lesson learned. It cash flows me, don't get me wrong. It's not a bad investment, but I could never sell it.
All that was wrong with the property market at that time.
And that's exactly it.
Day one refinance, totally crazy. Okay, so let's move on to today. And last time we spoke, you talked a little bit about what you were doing now. So I'd like to get there, but before we do, and your thoughts on the market, and you talked a bit about trends and things that you follow that were a little bit out of the box, which I'd love to talk about. Before we do that, can we start by just talking a little bit about what advice you would give to our audience today about what they should be doing? Maybe they've typically got a portfolio, they're not a full-time property person, they've got some investment flats or some HMOs, they're learning, they're growing, or maybe even starting out. Yeah.
So I guess, where we are in this current market, we've never seen what's going on before. So I'll cover this in a couple of little areas. The first one being, if you are sitting on a portfolio with nothing to add, i.e. you haven't got one in conveyancing, you haven't, or anything along those lines. If you've got a current portfolio sat there right now, or small portfolio as it may be, then sit on it. Okay, don't go panicking, don't go worrying. That's a very, very easy one. The where it becomes a little bit more complex is I was helping a chap this week who's in a development. We're talking from the beginning, so we'll not necessarily talk bridges again, or something again. I've got a number of people who I've spoken to recently who are riding bridges. Okay, now we had an individual who in the Blue Oak community who he had his mortgage offer, so he was on a bridge, mortgage offer dropped from a 70% loan to value to a 50% loan to value. Now that he could have handled. However, the very day he was due to complete on that mortgage, they pulled it completely. So you are going to have situations like that. Now they are there, and it's pointless burying your head in the sand. So if you're in that sort of situation where you're potentially riding a high price loan, I would start engaging with as many brokers as possible, not just the one that you've currently got, but as many brokers as possible to try and get you out of that current situation. That was some true practical advice I gave today, and hopefully he is actually on the up from that, and he's managing to, he's only going to move the bridge to another bridge because he can't physically get another product. At the moment, nobody is prepared to give him one, but at least what he's moving it to is a lot cheaper. What I would say is if you're looking to grow, where you are now, we are in a time that is going to be a fast time for property investors. What I would advise you to do is right now, sit on your hands. Okay? Do not go jumping into purchases or jumping into, yes, you can go into negotiations. I'll cover that in a second, but sit on your hands. When everyone's thrown out, and again, don't believe the social media crap that gets put out there. Race, okay, you are all running your own race. Do not become overwhelmed or think that you're missing out because somebody's saying things on social media like the Warren Buffett quote, which seems to get thrown around on a daily basis, where, buy when others are fearful, etc., etc. There's actually, if people knew the true history behind that quote, it would be quite an interesting affair. And I'm happy to talk about the Warren Buffett history behind that quote. But what I'm getting at is don't go jumping into purchasing just yet. What I would be doing right now is becoming very, very comfortable with analysis, deal analysis. Start analyzing the deals that are out there. Start finding the deals which have been on the market for some time. Deals that potentially you put offers in back in January and February, or even late last year, which were refused. Reinvigorate those conversations. If they were direct to vendor, reinvigorate those conversations, because if they didn't sell with anybody else, potentially you're going to have a fantastic opportunity moving forward. So that's what I'd be doing. Do not go jumping into purchases just yet. By all means, start the negotiations. By all means, do as much as you can. For me, it's analysis. You've got time now to learn deal analysis. People overlook true, decent deal analysis too much, I feel. What I always say is the money's always made at the front end. Okay, the money is made at the deal analysis stage, not at the back end, not by grafting 40 hours a week doing the work yourself because actually you've got some of the deal analysis wrong or anything along those lines. Deal analysis is critical. So spend a little bit of time now becoming comfortable with deal analysis. And again, what I mean by that is once you understand how to do it, become proficient at it. Now, I could walk into a viewing of a property and literally on the back of a fag packet gives the nth degree of deal analysis to know categorically what I would pay for that property there and there. And what that does is that gives me the upper edge over anybody who has to walk away and sit behind a computer and calculate it for the next 2 days. Because all I've done is I've practiced that skill and that art of learning how to analyze a deal. So that would be my first point, is really spend this time becoming comfortable with that. Spend the time researching your area. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Spend the time researching your area. Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, understand your goldmine area. And again, a lot of people will think, I'm going to understand my goldmine area because it's on my doorstep. But again, when I've talked about the council's 5-year plans there, I encourage you all to do that. I encourage you all to look at their commitment. One of the biggest ones at the moment that the councils are being forced to, well, all the councils should now have already made the statement of what their commitment is to eradicate homelessness within that region. Now, that's quite an interesting one. Now, I'm not saying you want to come into that sector, but what I am saying is, again, it's potentially another demographic, because the councils all have had to have provided a statement on how they are going to eradicate homelessness. And what a lot of them are doing is they're moving out some of the other council residents, okay, from what is left of small council housing. So we're seeing up here, generally it's the non-vulnerable, i.e. single man, single woman, or couple but without children, etc. They're asking them to move on to the PRS, the private rented sector. So the council can then facilitate the homelessness, that eradication of homelessness. And what that's doing is creating a massive bubble here of people who are looking for properties, who will have them automatically paid for and who are potentially good tenants. What I'm saying is it's just a general awareness of your area, but a little bit more than potentially some of you have done up to now. Yeah, I would say that's potentially wise how to use it. Where we're going post this whole affair, I'll give you a quick little synopsis on where I think we're going post this affair, where I think the opportunities will lie. So what I feel now, we've had the Scottish Land Registry close. We've had the English completely closed its door. English Land Registry hasn't formally closed its door, but it's as good as closed, okay, from the people who are trying to push deals through. It's not formally closed, but it's as good as closed. So what this is doing is, if you imagine a Coke bottle, we've just put the top on the Coke bottle, but everything else is fizzing up inside of that. We've got transactions which we're going through conveyancing. Now, like I said last time, conveyancing is never been one of those industries that's blink and you miss it. It's always been a very, very slow process. But again, that's even slowing down. We've got banks. The banks don't know how to lend. The banks physically don't know how to lend at the moment because they're so scared. We've got banks that have closed their door. I think there's going to be a lot of bad debt comes out of those when the lights when the spotlight is shone on them. You know, America, would I say this situation is different to the last time? America, 2 days ago, downgraded Morgan Stanley to a BBB rating. If people haven't seen The Big Short, look at it. You'll understand what I mean by a BBB rating. So the fact that they're doing that and the banks have still a bit of a shit show, I think is things to say. Wind forward to the property market. I think what's going to happen is when we see a light at the end of the tunnel, we are going to see the top come off that bottle of Coke, and it is going to go mental. I think we are going to have a massive surge in property deals going through. Those who haven't pulled out of property deals, I think we're going to have a complete surge in that. I think banks are going to be a little bit overwhelmed. And I think we're going to have, that optimistic bounce, okay, which we're already seeing in the markets at the moment. But long term, back end of the year, I would say we are going to get to the top of that bounce, and we will see a categoric downturn in the property market.
So you think there'll be a short-term bounce like the Boris bounce that I wish wasn't named that, but anyway, a sort of more exaggerated version of that bounce, and then actually a quite swift recession drop then.
I do, and the reason for that is I think there's going to be a lot of companies which are, I see it how I see it. I do, I think you will, IFAs, mortgage brokers, everything will always give you the other side of the coin and say everything is rosy, we're all good. And don't get me wrong, I think things are rosy if you're in a position to invest and you utilize the right tools. The reason I say that is things which haven't come to light. I think at the minute where we are with this coronavirus, everybody's still shocked that it might be 3 months. Everybody's looking forward to this Friday, which is the 3-week point, expecting the government to say you can go out again. Let's just look back again. Okay, one of my biggest things is about being aware, and I always tell people you've got to be aware of everything. Okay, so let's look what happened. 17th of March. What happened on the 17th of March? St. Patrick's Day. What was St. Patrick's Day? St. Patrick's Day was the last piss up that the government allowed everybody to have. What are we now seeing this week? We're seeing the people who went out on St. Patrick's Day, who got infected on St. Patrick's Day and have now had the incubation period starting to come to light. So I actually see for the next 2 weeks, we're going to see a rapid rise in the number of cases. Let's wait and see what happens. We had a drop today, but let's see what happens in 2 weeks. And let's see if that St. Patrick's Day thing had an impact. Now, that was due to not really understanding what was going on. Where I'm going with this is the fact that I don't think we're going to see or have a true indication if social isolation and the lockdown that we are in right now has had an effect until probably minimum early June, potentially mid-June, okay? I think the period of time until then, what's very much masked are going to be the unemployment figures, which are going to increase, are the businesses which are actually going under, that will go under. There's a lot of zombie businesses out there which potentially shouldn't be in business anyway because they're just riding debt. So those things which are going under aren't really going to come to light until, should we say, the back end of the year. And between now and the back end of the year, you're going to get the top coming off that Coke bottle. So you're going to see that natural, that kind of shooting up in the market. That's where I see we're going to go. I think unemployment's going to be the killer. I think, that's where I think we're going to go. I think the banking system, I think the banks are a bit, the loans that you mentioned earlier on are not being, the money that the government is being allocated is not being handed on to the front line. It is at a council level, but it's not on many other levels. We're at about £1 trillion now. Okay, everybody sees the 350 billion that the council, that the government announced, but it's actually closer to £1 trillion at the moment. That is a lot of money to be pumped into an economy which isn't actually producing anything.
There's a lot of money around all over the place, isn't there?
So, where do I see we're going to go? Okay, use this time to learn creativeness. Okay, back in 2010, when I knew the ins and outs of how to use options, options are a fantastic opportunity. The key with an option is knowing how to negotiate an option. Okay, options really are brilliant in negative equity times when people can't physically move on. Where are we now? What makes things in negative equity? Right, we've got low interest rates. We're at record low interest rates. When interest rates were at 0.5%, it was said that if interest rates rose by another 0.5%, okay, so to 1%, if interest rates were at 1%, it would put the residential mortgage market at 30%, 30% of that would be unaffordable, i.e. they've overgeared themselves that much. When it's on a freaking knife edge, okay? So to learn that skill, to learn the ability to learn what it is, how it can be used, portfolio landlords who have overgeared themselves over the years, the opportunities are endless. Use this time now to learn that. That's what I'll be doing come the back end of this year. Everything I do will either be some form of assisted sale, some form of option. Worst case scenario, maybe an EDC. Not a huge fan of EDCs. They have their moment and they can be used to an exchange with delayed completion, but they're a little bit risky. So yeah, really learn options. Also, if you have portfolios in your areas, if you have large HMOs or something like that, the rental demand, everyone goes on supply and demand. The rental demand will still be there. People will still want to rent. The key will be whether that individual is able to pay their rent. Okay, are they now unemployed? Will they physically be able to pay their rent? What I do, as I say, with my portfolio is I've moved my entire portfolio onto leases. So leases with supported living companies, leases with housing associations, full FRI leases that pick up both the rent and all of the bills. It totally de-risks me, okay? Because obviously you do your due diligence in the company, but it completely de-risks you as an investor. I very much view myself now as an investor, not somebody on the front line of property. That comes down to passion. And again, I could talk about why when it comes to passion, I've gone that route rather than being on the front line.
Rich, you just mentioned options there. Alan and Penny from Peel Homes, I don't know whether it's Alan or Penny, they just asked on the chat, you've mentioned options a few times. I certainly have done quite a few exchange with delay completion. The creativity I think is useful. I agree they are riskier and they're not for the faint-hearted. There's a time and place for them. Options are the thing to do when there's some more distress around, because you can protect yourself. The question from the Peel Homes guys, recommendations on further reading, kind of where do we start, sort of thing.
Okay. Now there's a lot of, again, be careful on what you see out there, because again, options are a very straightforward thing. Andy Thomas, our business partner, he has a YouTube channel. Look him up at, I've forgotten the name of his YouTube channel.
365 Investor, Rich.
365 Investor YouTube channel. Andy covers a lot of options. Andy's our business partner. We're currently doing a lot in Blue Oak with reference to creative strategies and actually education topics around that. So if I drop what I'll do is I'll drop you a link in. With regards to books, okay, now a lot of the books will cover the basics of an option. Okay, if you're not part of the group, guys, please do join. There's the link. It's just a Facebook group, and we discuss options along. Look up him. He's got some very good YouTube videos on options. Why I don't necessarily recommend books on options is the understanding of an option. So it is quite a straightforward thing. You could understand an option within 1 or 2 pages of what it physically is. So literally Google UK lease option contract. The reason I say UK is because options are used in America quite a lot, and they're subtly different. Options have been used in the commercial sector for a lot longer than they have in the residential sector. So they're nothing new. So you can understand the fundamentals of what one is. You can understand the fundamentals of what one is from a very quick Google search. Where options become difficult is in the physical negotiation of an option. That actually comes down to practice, and that's what I encourage people to do. So you've got to imagine, if you are trying to negotiate an option, it's potentially something that individual has never ever heard of. You're selling this scenario where, look, I want to take the property off you now. You are in negative equity, but I want to buy it in 5 years' time for, call it a premium figure. I want to buy it in 5 years' time, but I'm going to allow you to move on now. The reason they're very key is because for that individual is if they're in negative equity, they can't physically move. So you're saying to them, look, I want to take the property fully off your hands. I'll agree this price to be payable in 5 years' time, and you can walk away lock stock now. You can offer them an option deposit to do so, which allows them potentially to go and move somewhere new. Again, that option figure would come off the back end. But what you're doing is you're solving a problem. Remember at the beginning I said I love to solve the problem. I'm identifying what the problem is with that investor and how I can go about helping them. So what I'm getting at is to learn an option is very much a very easy thing to do with an online search. Okay, do not go and read 300 pages on what an option is, because it'll just simply go over the same thing again and again and give you different scenarios. Reach out to us, as I say, on Blue Oak by all accounts. Reach out to us there, and we'll do a specific video on it or a live on it if necessary to talk to you about the physical negotiations of that. I always say when I'm teaching people to do options, practice at home. If you can't explain what an option is to a 6-year-old, and the reason I use a 6-year-old is because I used to do it on my daughter. If you can't explain what an option is to a 6-year-old and that have them fully understand what an option is, then I question whether you're explaining it correctly. And if you're not explaining it correctly, then you're never ever going to be able to sell that to a vendor who is distressed. So
the idea to genuinely have to explain it to a 6-year-old. That's brilliant. Rich, we could go on for hours. It'd be fascinating to chat to you. We're already coming up on the hour mark. I'm just going to take one more of the questions from the chat and then ask you a closing question. Steve Curtis has just said, if you're predicting a peak somewhere in you use the Coke analogy, which I think is great. With the top coming off the bottle of fizzed up Coke. If you're predicting a peak towards the end of 2020, and then some sort of a crash following. His question is: are you thinking hold your horses until at least 2021 before good opportunities start?
Right. I think you've firstly got to understand what sort of opportunity you're chasing. Okay, and again, you've got to look at. You can't take what I've said there literally. You've got to really understand because it changes on a daily basis. Now, if we're looking at, so again, you've got to look beyond the property market. You've got to be able to look and analyze the market yourselves. Okay, nobody will be able to pick the bottom of this market. In fact, we dropped by 40%, the UK markets. The only reason the property market, I feel, wasn't affected at the time was because we immediately went into kind of lockdown. People weren't buying. But all of the markets globally dropped by 40%. Now that was on pure fear, nothing else, absolute fear. Now they're rebounding now, and they'll probably rebound to about the 30% mark. So they'll rebound quite a long way because it dropped on fear. It didn't drop on anything. There is a point to this, Steve, so we'll get there. They will rebound because they dropped on fear. However, what I see that subsequent crash coming, I see that coming because of the second order effects that I would call them, the second order effects from this coronavirus, the potential huge unemployment, the companies that have gone under, the massive amount of bad debt that will be unveiled by the end of the year. That is what's going to cause the crash, not the coronavirus itself. It's the second order effect of the coronavirus. Now, when you say look for opportunities, I am not stopping looking for opportunities now. The key for finding an opportunity right now is to find an opportunity that you've analyzed correctly and has the sufficient or correct profit margin in it at the front end. If it's got that margin in it that satisfies you right now, or let's say immediately that the bottle comes in, you can go and buy again, there is nothing wrong with buying it. We're in property for the long term, okay? We're not in the property for early next year. I do think there'll be more opportunities come the back end of this year. However, I think you'll be better off. There'll be a lot more creative things. Would I advise waiting until then? I wouldn't advise waiting because you never know where the bottom is going to be. Okay. Nobody likes a bottom picker. Okay. Never try and pick a bottom. It's a dirty affair. So you've got, as long as the analysis done correctly and you've got the right margin in it for you, this is a long game. What will prevent you doing and moving is the one thing that drives property markets. many people will think it's interest rates. Many people will think it's supply and demand. No, the thing that drives property markets and the single thing that drives property markets is the availability and the liquidity of cash. The banks stop lending and the banks turn all their LTV rates to 50%, okay, no matter how good that deal is that you've identified and analyzed, can you physically finance the thing? Can you leverage and remortgage that at the back end, okay? That's what's going to be the key. So to answer the question, would I be waiting to early doors 21? No, I wouldn't. I would be analyzing correctly now, ensuring that you've got the correct margins in there. If the margins are in there, there is nothing wrong with moving. As part of that analysis comes, how am I physically going to finance this? You've got to be able to tick all the boxes. The analysis is done, tick. Profit margin is there that I want, tick. Can I finance this? Bugger. All the banks have stopped lending. Cross. I can't finance that. That may be the stumbling block moving forward. So Steve, never stop looking for opportunities. Always keep looking for those opportunities, but always ensure that you can finance them. And if you are able to finance them, and certainly if you're using investors' money, which I think is going to be one of the biggest shit shows known to man in the next 12 months, people who've borrowed investors' money on 10% interest rates that they think they can pay back, stand by for that one. If you can physically finance that in a good manner and leverage correctly, take the opportunity now. You're in this for the long game.
Great advice, Rich. Thank you. But if you're, no one can ever pick the bottom of a market. That's absolutely. Steve, if you want to know more about the cycle, Rich just talked about second order effects. If you want to understand more about the psychology about how this happens, the 18-year property cycle is a good place to understand why things happen based on emotions, not because cycles are 18 years, they're not, but people have an emotional cycle that they go through. But Rich is absolutely right. The property market moves because of the supply of money. When money is available, what happens? They lend it out, then we all go buying. The brilliant example being the Mortgage Express same-day refinance. Magically, £112,000 property is worth £139,000.
And there wasn't even a brown envelope handed over.
Right. I mean, it's crazy, and it's still not worth £139,000 today. That's a perfect example. Rich, we have got to our hour mark. I want to say a big thank you for your really wise words. Before we sign off and let everybody go, we got to the magic 50, which is fantastic. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Before I sign off, can I just ask the sort of classic closing question, Rich, and you've mentioned this a few times already. Where can people find out more about you if they want to learn more or connect with you?
Yeah, guys, the easiest way is through the Blue Oak community. Please do join that. I'll drop the link quickly in one more time. Please join the Blue Oak community. Please send me a personal message on there. I do not mind, and I do try and reply to all messages I receive. So what I'll do is I'll drop one in. We run quite a lot of, at the moment, we're running quite a lot of Zoom calls, free trainings within Blue Oak itself. So we are running that through a WhatsApp group rather than the mailing list. It's a simple WhatsApp group. Don't worry, you're not going to be inundated with chat. We've turned all chat off. This is simply an info-only WhatsApp group, which I'll drop a link in there. If you join it, all we do is we post daily what our Zoom is going to be and what time it's going to be and the link to the Zoom. It's not a chit-chat group. It's purely for educational events that we're running. We're pretty much running 2 a day at the moment, a morning and an evening, and a fitness session, which Amy, who runs the fitness element, who's a personal trainer, will run a little exercise routine as well. So join them. I say join the Facebook group. If you want to ask me anything directed, personal, please drop me a personal message on there. Friend me, Rich Liddle on Facebook. As I say, I'm obviously one of the admins on Blue Oak, and by all means, please join the WhatsApp group if you want to know more. I haven't got the list of who Andy Thomas is talking tomorrow. I haven't got his. I was just looking to see if I had the.
Thank you very much. That's So guys, you've seen the link in the so not the show notes, in the group chat there. There's Rich's Facebook group for Blue Oak. and there's a WhatsApp group if you want to connect for their regular live trainings. You do 2 a day. That's quite impressive. Well done. So Rich, thank you very much. That was really, really useful, fascinating. Lots of very good quality, sensible, sound advice. We've already overrun a little bit, so I'm gonna close now. So this has been the second Property Meetup meeting. We'll be having to run like this, as many of us are on Zoom, for a long while. We will do the next one from another member of the panel with a different perspective in a couple of weeks' time, with a similar format, similar opportunity. So thank you very much, Rich. Truly fascinating. Everybody join Blue Oak, learn as much as you can from Rich. Highly recommend that. Thank you very much for joining, and look out for the next opportunity.
Thank you for having me, Rob.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Rob. Cheers.
Very much.